there was, of the last 100, 150 years, over the past period of time, in various different European countries, or different central countries in itself. Today I want to concentrate on the Rabbinical Seminary, let's just say, I believe in Constantinople. This was in Turkey, right at the end of the 19th century. More of a historic class, that there was a Rabbinic Seminary over there. And I think the actual director of the seminary was a man named Abraham Danon, Rabbi Abraham Danon. I think it was originally going to be connected to the Alliance Israelite Universal, or Kol Yisrael Chaverim, and it would be opened in the year 1897, or maybe it was founded by, yes, it was, I think, either in Adrianople or around those areas in of itself. So he would become the leader there, and we can explore a bit within regards to maybe what was the idea within regards to, let's just say, this rabbinical seminary. It's a very, very, let's just say, spoken about at that point in time. I think it was many rabbis, potentially from the Haskalah movement, would have been involved over there. So I thought it would be an important topic to talk about, because some of the rabbis we've spoken about on this series might have been connected to there, or there might have been some specific connection in of itself. So it's another interesting edition. And we already in this series spoke about the Rabbinical Seminary in Rhodes, for example. I think various different, also in Bosnia and in various other places. So today we're going to talk about the country of Turkey, let's say the Rabbinical Seminary that there was in of its day. So very interesting. So we will explore it. I believe it will be actually Abraham Danon, as we said before, that would actually lead this seminary. And we're going to speak about him in the coming minutes. I think it's going to be important to speak about him. And we'll also explore within regards to the history of the Rabbinical Seminary. Now, it's actually interesting. I believe this Rabbinical Seminary was started in the year 1897. And it was very much connected, I think, initially to the Alliance school system. Remember, there was many Alliance schools at that point in time. And I think the Alliance school was not necessarily a very strong Torah, curriculum school in of itself. That would teach various different languages. They will concentrate on human rights also. But they would try and transform the Turkish rabbinate over here. And I think, I'm just now quoting an article that's connected, I believe, to the Stanford Library, famous Stanford Library. I believe the article was written in the year 1897, if I'm not mistaken, or it was actually produced from there. I'm not sure who the actual writer itself maybe was. Someone named Simon Schwarzfuchs. I think it was a part of the Miskav Yerushalayim in 1987. So I'm going to just read over a little bit within regards to the data they've got about the Rabbinical Seminary, because it's not that easy to find information on the internet within regards to it. So I think it'd be opportune time to speak about it now that we're on topics of the various different seminaries over there. So it was, let's say at that point in time, there was a firm belief among Alliance that the state of the rabbinate in the East was one of principal cases, and maybe not forwardness, this was in their eyes, of the Oriental Jewry. According to Alliance, the rabbis had not exercised, let's just say, according to them, any effective action over their communities for over a century. So I think at that point in time, maybe it would have been at the year 1800, they're going all the way back to. With rare exceptions, the rabbis of the communities of the East have not been exposed to any general culture, ignore maybe European languages. And as a result, they felt that people were incapable of following the progress of the historical, philosophical, and exegetical sciences in the countries of the West. This was their, let's just say, their undertaking. I'm just quoting the article here. It's not my words. I don't really know much about the seminary. We're just trying to go through all the different countries at that stage in time. So we're using let's say, compilation actually says in itself. This incomplete education, in their eyes, sometimes prevents them from associating themselves with attempts made to raise the intellectual level of the Jewish youth. The Alliance was convinced that its educational work would reach fruition only if the rabbinate supported it fully. The most logical way of securing this support would be to train a modern rabbinical elite in a rabbinical seminary modeled after those in the West. That was their approach over there. The action there was a man named Abraham Danon of Edirne he brought about the foundation of such a seminary. Once again, I think he actually is considered one of the maskilim, in parts of the Haskalah. Actually, Wikipedia itself lists many different members of the Haskalah, different rabbis of the Haskalah. Nearly, virtually about 95% in their list are from Ashkenazi communities. But what's interesting is he was actually one of the only Sephardi ones that was actually on the list itself. So there was a Maskilic culture, as you said, at that point in time that came to being, especially in Erdine, after there was, I think, Joseph Halevi's activities. He was there in the 1850s and 1860s. Let's say it intersected with the larger work of the Alliance with which it had become associated at that point in time. So Rabbi Abraham Danon was, let's just say, an important, representative of the Haskalah in Erdine, and he played a particularly significant role in this development. Let's just say his life and work, ignored in scholarly literature. Let's say many people will feel that it should be studied on its own. What did he actually do in his life and different works? He belonged to an important rabbinical family actually in Erdine. His father was a man of the name Bechor Danon, who was one of the first rabbis of the town to befriend, at that point in time, Joseph Halevi. And Halevi's example deeply influenced the young Abraham Danon. Remember, I'm quoting this from this article over here. He attended the yeshiva in Erdine, but was very much, let's say, autodidact, mastered the various different languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, Turkish, Arabic, Persian, Ethiopic, French, German, Greek, and Latin. So seemingly he knew many languages. Come with the year 1878, he became active in public affairs of his community, and he sponsored, let's just say, the vocational training program for some of the students of the Alliance School, and created a society 4 years later. I think there was something called the Ha'Pe'ulah to oversee the functioning of the program and to further the efforts of the productivization over here. I'm just quoting the article. His other great concerns, let's just say, and this actually is all sourced in this article, his other great concern was the reform of the Talmud Torah of Erdine, and he preached incessantly in favor of the Alliance taking it over. Remember, as we said before, Alliance School was not favored by many of the great rabbis of yesteryear. They came, many cities did not want the school systems to actually take place in various different North African countries, because they felt that it would bring away from, it would affect from the Torah sphere the level of Torah learning at that point in time. Obviously, they were promoting various different languages, just for example. In 1879, he established himself, Abraham Danon, a society for spreading the ideas of the Haskalah, the Hevrat Darshei HaHaskalah. I'm not going to say what it says in Hebrew, but it was a Judeo-Spanish bulletin published on the 10th anniversary of the society, and it was instructive about its activities, as I say. By then, it had a membership of 200 people. Each had a reading room and subscribed to Hebrew newspapers. There was a newspaper called the Hamagid, as well as a Judeo-Spanish newspapers, I believe, also. It sponsored lectures on history, geography, science, and literature. Its aim was to further the instruction of the youth. Danon, let's just say the best way, I'm just quoting the article, to achieve this was by teaching of the history of the Jewish people, who in spite of persecution and dispersion had kept its national unity and had rendered eminent services to civilization. The society sponsored the publication of a scholarly journal in 1888, the Yosef Da'at, it was actually called, in which Abraham Danon wrote extensively in Hebrew and Judeo-Spanish on Jewish history, especially on Turkish Jewish history. They were very into history. I think some of the people that might have been associated with the Haskalah. The journal was closed down during the same year by the Hamidian censorship. Nevertheless, Danon continued to publish widely. I'm just reading over an article from a publication of the Stanford, which is featured in Stanford Library. As a result of activities in favor of the Alliance in Erdine, Danon was well known to the Central Committee. I think in 1891, after extensive personal contacts with members of the Anglo-Jewish Association, which actively supported the work of the Alliance, and I think there was someone, Zadok Khan, who happened to be the chief rabbi of France at that point in time, Danon succeeded in orchestrating enough support in the West to persuade the Central Committee to open a small seminary under his direction in Erdine. As he wrote to someone with the name Isidore Loeb, he was the general secretary of Alliance. One thing that was missing in his mind for the Alliance's network was regeneration, was reforming of the rabbinate. And there's always, let's just say they wanted something to come, let's just say, from the West. They weren't so keen on the structure of the rabbinate at that point in time. Once again, I'm pointing out he was connected to the Haskalah movement. It's not my personal, give my opinion or advocacy, whatever this seminary, whatever standard it was at that point in time, as I identify with the ultra-Orthodox world. I think it's important we see what the rabbinical seminaries were, because many of the rabbis, I think they would learn, they will become rabbis in various different communities later on. The curriculum of the seminary bears all the marks of, let's say, a maskilic institution. Most instructions was in Hebrew. The students studied Talmud and Shulchan Aruch, biblical and post-biblical Jewish history, Hebrew grammar and literature, religious philosophy, such as the work of the Sadia Gaon, and the modern biblical commentaries of Wesley and Mendelssohn. Remember, he was Mendelssohn was very involved with the Haskalah movement, and I think his descendants would go, and the people around him in his circles, in especially the Ashkenazic circles, many of them would go off the derech, and many of the rabbis nowadays would not speak favorably so much about him per se. So I'm just saying that on the article here in the video. This is not actually featured in the article, just my own word. The students were also initiated into the art of preaching, which was taken to be one of the most important parts of the curriculum. I think this was, of course, a program with which was very different from the one that was used by traditional yeshivot, which emphasized the Talmud above all. Many of the yeshivot nowadays would concentrate very much on Gemara. The introduction of Jewish history, Hebrew grammar, philosophy, and modern commentaries, as well as the stress on preaching, made the rabbinical seminary a self-consciously, let's say, a different institution over here. Before long, several developments in Istanbul led to the transfer of the seminary to the capital. I think it was in 1893. There was a special class to train rabbis had been created in the Sul-i Marif school in Istanbul, a school subsidized by the chief rabbinate, which had been found specifically for the purpose of providing instruction in Turkish. And this class, let's say, would receive good marks from some Alliance teachers in Istanbul, who praised the level of Hebrew taught there. I think it was taught by someone named Rabbi Hershenson of Jerusalem. I don't know much about him. I'm going to say that on the outset. But it was criticized for leaving the teaching of the Talmud in the hands of yeshivot, which the students had to attend for this purpose. The fact that no Jewish history was taught was also noted with disapproval. Upon the intervention of the director of this institution, I think his name was Moise Aaron Fresco, he was a chief rabbi, I believe, and also I think the chief rabbi, Rabbi Moshe Halevi, appealed to the Alliance to unite this class with the Rabbi Danon Seminary in Erdan and to transfer the latter to Istanbul. The chief rabbi also promised to appoint all the graduates of the new seminary to rabbinical positions. This was stated over, I think they quote this from Rabbi Moshe Halevi from the 6th of December in the year 1896. This was a great opportunity for the Alliance to have, let's say, they felt at that stage in time, a direct impact on the education of future rabbis of the Ottoman Empire. It agreed to subsidize a new institution and transfer the seminary from Erdin to Istanbul, where it began to work in its new setting in 1898. It also said there was a rabbi named Rabbi Chaim Nachum, will have the title Effendi, who was a Turkish Jew, I believe from Manisa in Asia Minor, and then he was also part of the Alliance. He was a student there who had just graduated from Paris Rabbinical Seminary to teach under Danon in the new institution. So at that point in time, there was, and they quote something from the 19th of January 1898 within regards to it, where it says that Chaim Nachum was to have a, let's just say, a controversial career as a chief rabbi of Ottoman Empire after the Young Revolution in 1908. Much is actually spoken about that. I think we've spoken about him before. Now, Abraham Danon applied the program that he had been using in Erdin with some modification. The teaching, let's just say, of Turkish was increased substantially and was used as much as possible as the language of instruction over there, as was befitting an official seminary founded to train the future rabbis of the Ottoman Empire over there at that point in time. There was, again, great stress put on preaching, as this was supposed to have the greatest moral impact on the population. The students had to prepare sermons, which they delivered regularly in synagogues of Istanbul. The seminary was initially looked upon favorably at that point in time, especially, I believe, in Jerusalem. That's what the article is saying over here. We just get the place over here. sorry, not in Jerusalem, in the provinces. The Sephardi rabbinate in Palestine seems to have supported it very strongly. At one stage, a grandson of Eli Pangel, the Sephardi chief rabbi of Palestine, the son of Rabbi Chaim Raphael Ma'aman, who was ex-chief rabbi of Tiberias, and the son of Rabbi Chaim Kamhi, who was of Hebron, were all studying at that seminary. So that's very interesting. You can see, so they would move at that point in time over there, seemingly. So these are many of these rabbis well known. I think this was quoted in 19th December 1902. But trouble broke out. The seminary threatened the very existence and livelihood of the traditional rabbinate, attempting as it did to create a new type of rabbi with a different worldview. Now, I think the chief rabbi at Moshe Levi played, as always, an ambiguous role. This is what the article says over here. He had been convinced of the necessity for the new seminary by the appeals made to him from several notables of the committee at that time, community. Without his permission, the new institution could not have been established in Istanbul. Nevertheless, he was, let's just say the article says, a weak person and changed opinions regularly. He easily became, let's say, helpless in the face of all different warring factions. The seminary became entangled in the conflict between the secular communal council and the rabbinical council that paralyzed all communal affairs between 1903 to 1905. This was quoted from something from 20th of April 1904. Most of the conflict concerned the matter of communal finances, and as well the seminary was a communal body. It suffered from the stopping of all subsidies during the crises. Furthermore, it was made one of the, let's say, bargaining points between the two sides. The rabbinical council insisted that a jury made up of solely of rabbis examined the graduating students of the seminary, while the communal council wanted also its own representatives in their examining body. Now, this would drag on for over a year, it's reported over, and was settled by a compromise, it's reported over. Even after the matter was resolved, tension between traditionalist rabbinate and seminary continued, with various ploys used by both sides to negate the power above it. Now, I think it was somewhat year 1908 at that point in time. I think it says over here the Elan had gone out of the seminary. According to someone named Isaac Fernandez, the president of Alliance Regional Committee in Istanbul, it had yielded no positive results, they felt, whatsoever. In their opinion, that was. By then, 14 of its 30 students had abandoned the seminary, so that's quite a high rate over here, without finishing their studies. One of the 16 who graduated only had been elected as chief rabbi of the community of Bursa. Another one was working in the administration of the chief rabbinate in Jerusalem. And another one had been imposed by the communal council as secretary to the chief rabbi of Istanbul. 8 had become teachers in various Talmudei Torah, and 5 had become teachers in Hebrew in Alliance schools. This was quoted over here, I think from the 22nd of March 1908, an article of Fernandez over there. The reason for this failure were many. The future of the students as rabbis was by no means guaranteed. Nobody under the age of 30 could be ordained as a rabbi. That's what's reported over. This was quoted from the 12th of January in 1903. Most of the graduates of the seminary, coming from poor backgrounds, let's say maybe financially, and finishing their studies in the early 20s, could not afford to wait for a few years without any source of livelihood. Now, the chief rabbi had promised several times to employ them in communal administration of Istanbul, but it didn't have necessarily been seen to keep, the article says over here. Furthermore, even though the chief rabbi had promised to appoint them to positions in the empire, he did not have the authority to impose his own candidates on the other communities. The Jewish millet, let's just say, in the Ottoman Empire was not centralized, and each community was free to elect its own rabbi, and they usually elected rabbis of, let's say, in the article says over here, the old guard. Another important source of, let's say, something that was seen weak within the seminary was the lack of funds. The Istanbul Communal Council, severely strapped for funds itself, rarely fulfilled its obligation to subsidize the seminary. Maybe they stated the thing. And the Alliance itself was not prepared to make even greater financial sacrifices for an institution which was not, they didn't feel, was particularly useful. I think from 1903, its subsidies to the seminary was cut several times. The situation did not change after the election of chief rabbinate in 1909 of Rabbi Chaim Nachum Effendi, the second teacher in the seminary, and he actually happened to have been Abraham Danon's son-in-law. The two had competed for the position and were no longer, and they both wanted, I think, a specific position over there, and the community went from one financial crisis to another, and The seminary was slow and they didn't have much funds. There were attempts to transform it into Hebrew teaching training college for the Alliance schools, but the Alliance, let's say, dragged its feet, the article says over here. I think quoting from an article from 12th of December 1911 over there. The seminary was effectively closed when Abraham Danon left Istanbul for Paris in 1917, so that would have been more than 20 years he was there. He had carried alone the burden of the institution for several years and had been gradually abandoned by all parties concerned, including the Alliance. With the exception of one appointment in Bursa, the seminary had not succeeded in placing any of its graduates in the most important, as they felt, rabbinical positions of the empire. The failure of the seminary illustrated, let's say, the limits of Alliance's powers. Such as institution could only succeed when its work was effectively supported by the communal administration. Unlike a state, Alliance lacked the power of enforcement, had to rely on localities for the actual implementation of its policies. It had succeeded in the case of its schools to be, let's just say, a leading place at that point in time, as all schools began as private establishments and maintained independence. The action of the Alliance was always on a much less secure footing outside the domain of education, when it had to rely on a great extent goodwill of local forces. Remember, we spoke, many of the rabbis in various different places was against the school systems starting in certain areas. I think one of the cities in Tunisia, most notably, and maybe possibly in Iraq also. And I'll have to double check on it. Almost invariably failed when it became too dependent on local communal administrations, as, let's just say, most of these in Turkey were hopelessly divided and in a state of paralysis in the modern period. In the case of the Rabbinical Seminary, it committed an error, let's just say, which ultimately proved fatal. This is what the article says. It assumed, with little reason, that there was in fact a real communal administration in place, while experience had shown again and again the opposite was true. The instability of the Sephardi communal structures during the course of the 19th century had not been adequately studied. It was a permanent feature of Jewish life in the Ottoman Empire. That's what the article says. It was impossible for the seminary to bear fruit in the communal, let's just say, crisis that followed one another with dizzying regularity. The reform of the Turkish rabbinate was impossible without the reforming of the communal administration. This is what the article. What had taken the state to impose from above, as in the case of France, where it had created the, let's say, consistory system, was impossible to achieve in the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman state was not a Western nation, and it did not actively seek to regenerate its Jews. Without this impetus coming from the state, I believe the communal bodies remained in a condition of anarchy, a situation which set limits to the effectiveness of Alliance's attempts to transform at that point in time. Like maybe their goal was Turkish Jewry as a whole. For this reason, the regeneration brought by the Alliance worked best through its schools, on the level of individual who could take advantage of new educational opportunities. But according to the article here, it says it failed on the level of community, whether it was in the case of reforming the rabbinate or reforming the communal administrative bodies. So they conclude over here, give a conclusion of this article, maybe connected to the seminary, so I'll just state it over here. And I think they conclude at the end, by the 20th century, the Alliance had put into practice in Turkey reforms it saw as indispensable for regeneration in the areas it perceived as vital. It had overhauled an education system, created a rabbinical seminary for the creation of a more modern rabbinate, as they state in the article, and established a vocational training system to spread productive trades among Jews. Its efforts in the last two areas had not been crowned, let's just say, with great success. Ultimately, it was its schools which played the most important role, and we do see it makes a role at the end. And then, even though the work of schools reached a minority of school-age population in Turkey, so it's quoted from another book, The French Jews and Turkish Jews, over here, the minority had become substantial one by the 20th century, setting the tone for the rest of Jewish society. The Alliance school network had emerged as the only Jewish mass educational system, having either replaced the traditional one or altered it by all its recognition, and it goes all over the domain. There were many forces at work favoring, at that point in time, a westernization in Turkey, but in the case of the Jews, these forces, whether in the shape of increased trade contacts with the West or rather weak reforms coming from the Ottoman state, could not compare in scope and breadth with the organized and institutional presence of Alliance. And that's what it's saying over here. I was just using this interesting article over here, and I'll just reiterate. I use this over here from, I think it was connected to the Stanford Libraries, and actually gives a title here in French. It doesn't give it in English, so it's, I think, a 23-page article. The article which I've used was from Aaron Rodriguez, the Alliance Israelite Universal and Attempt to Reform Jewish Religious and Rabbinical Instruction in Turkey. So it's a very in-depth article over here about that Talmud Torah. Let's speak a bit more in regards to Abraham Danon, who was, let's just say, the head of the seminary, the director. He was born in the year 1857. He was educated, let's say, at home by his father. As I said, he was a rabbi of Adrianople, and he became in turn a rabbi and an erudite, biblical and Talmudic scholar. It's interesting. I think Rabbi Danon would have an instructor who was, I'll just find a place over here. He had his tutor in Western culture was Rabbi Yosef Halevi. He was a dynamic personality who became the leader. I'm just quoting the article over here using the archive.jp.r.org.uk article over here, and communicated his knowledge and enthusiasm to a young group of names who later, he would later on found the cultural association called the Darchei Haskalah. I remember many Rabbanim were speaking very harshly against the Haskalah movement, even to nowadays. So I'm just stating that on the outset. Danon's literary outpost was, as the article says, erudite, as it was varied. He contributed articles in Hebrew journals, collaborated with various other things. He possessed knowledge, as we stated on the outset, of Hebrew, Aramaic, Ethiopian, Turkish, Arabic, Persian, Greek, Latin, French, German, and English. And he was very into Jewish history, as we said before. He published a Toldot B'nai Abraham, translation in Hebrew of Theodore Reinach's History of the Jews, to which he added numerous extracts from greats, Geiger and Schulman. He wrote in French a complete history of Shabtai Tzvi's false Messiah movement, and in a funeral orientation on Danon, published in Istanbul's Ha-Menorah, I think in May 1925. So they quote more with regards to him. He was also a poet. In 1888, he published in Hebrew a collection of poems entitled Maskil Eidan. I think they consist of translations from Virgil, Sadi, and Victor Hugo, respectively, over there. In 1896, he published his very, let's say the article says, very well-received compilation of a Judea Spagnos and, let's say, romances sung by Sephardim of the Eastern Mediterranean. And I think it was well respected in various other places, especially in Madrid at that point in time. We spoke about the Yosef Adat, which was published in 1888. He was founder, as we stated before, of the Rabbinical Seminary in Adrianople, where he held several chairs simultaneously. At the request of Alliance, he went on several missions to various cities of the Orient. For more than 20 years, he was a president of the Adrianople of the ORP. During the First World War, he was able, after endless difficulties, to leave Turkey in order to settle in Paris. And it talks about his time period of how he didn't make it to chief rabbi of Turkey. And he passed away in Paris in the year 1925. Now, we can say a bit more with regards to him also. Just on this special, let's say, edition, just learning about the Rabbinic Seminary over here. And he was very well traveled. He would be in Paris on several occasions before. Yosef Halevi happened to have also been a professor, I believe, also. And he would appoint actually in the Rabbinical Seminary Chaim Nachum Effendi as his deputy, as before, and Dr. David Marcus would also be part of it at that point in time. It's interesting. Rabbi Chaim Nachum Effendi married Sultana, which was daughter of Abraham Danon, also, which is very, very interesting also to point out. And he himself passed away, I think, on the 29th of Iyar in 1925. We're talking about 100 years ago. It's interesting. His wife's name was Vida Halfon. I think she was born in the year 1859, also in Turkey. They went on to have some among the children. I'll list the names over here that's stated over here. Franca Danon, someone named Grazia Danon, also. Jean Danon, Joseph Peppo Danon, I think he passed away in 1942, Philippe Behor Samuel Danon, he passed away in 1960, Robert Isaac Danon, passed away in 1942, Sidone Danon, Sultana Danon, she passed away in the year 1967, Sylvia Danon, and also Vitaly Chaim Danon. Also, this is what's actually written over them. They actually give, they speak about this in some detail within regards to it. There's a whole family tree. Let's just maybe speak a few more words within regards to him, and then we'll go on to maybe look at Rabbi Chaim Nachum Effendi, also speak about him for a couple of minutes. And he had like a proper bibliography, as we stated before on the outset, and he would speak about Jewish studies of the Jews of Adrianople, and also in Salonika, he would, in Greece, he would actually try and concentrate on what actually went on over there at various different points of time. And yeah, that's very, very interesting. So he was very into Hebrew literature also, we have to point out. So we'll just come inside, just getting more information just within regards to him. His newspaper, I think he had a newspaper that was published every 4 days, featured literary and historical writing in the Hebrew in square letters. And he would have various writers would be part of this, including the famous Shlomo Avram Rosanis, who we've spoken about before, who was a famous writer of an encyclopedia, I think, of Sephardic Jewry. He was a supporter at Danon of the Zionist movement also, which we have to point out. So he was very connected to Zionism, like many of these rabbis would at that stage in time. Now, we said that his deputy was Rabbi Chaim Nachum Effendi, who would later on become the chief rabbi of Turkey, a position that I think he wanted. Yeah, so we're just speaking over here. I believe Rabbi Chaim Nachum Effendi was actually born in the year 1873 and passed away in the year 1960. He was also a Dayan, he was a Posek, he was a historian also, so he would take on this position. He would get the title Effendi, which was, the name Effendi is something. He was born in the year 1872. He actually was sent by his parents to Yeshiva in Tiberias, and he would attend the Rabbinical Seminary Academy in Paris, I believe, receive a smicha over there, and he would take on various different, let's just say, teaching positions, including a Turkish military academy. And we talked about, I believe he was the deputy at this Rabbinical Seminary in Turkey at one stage in time. He succeeded Rabbi Moses Levi as a Chacham Bashi, the chief rabbi of the Ottoman Empire. This was in the year 1909, which is seen as an important position at that stage in time. And he had contact with many heads of especially the community of Cairo. And I think he would later on, if I'm not mistaken, he would become the chief rabbi also of, he was the chief rabbi of the Ottoman Empire, and possibly also the chief rabbi of Cairo, if I'm not mistaken also. So Chaim Nachum Effendi, who was Khatan of Abraham Danon, would have those prominent positions. Now, let's speak a bit about Rabbi Moses Levi, who was also, I think he had the name Effendi also. He was rabbi of the Ottoman Empire. He was the rabbi at the time when the seminary was appointed. He was first appointed rabbinical court at the instruction of his father, and was then later on appointed as a chief rabbi following the emigration of Rabbi Yakir Giron. Interestingly enough, we can say maybe a few more words within regards to him. So before, he was a titled Effendi, as he passed away in the year 1910, and he was actually born himself in Bursa, and which is obviously part of the Ottoman Empire. He would study in the Rabbinical Seminary over there in his youth, and I think Yakir Giron, who hopefully we spoke. Actually, I think we spoke about him already. He immigrated to Israel in 1872. That's when he would become the Chacham Bashi, and he was very, very well connected with many, many important figures, just to say, all over the world. I think he was in contact with most of the rabbis of the Ottoman Empire, who in fact served under him. Many appointments, I think, of chief rabbis throughout the empire were under his control. I think in 1889, he worked to transfer Rabbi Raphael Meir Panizel from an acting position to the official position of Chacham Bashi of Eretz Yisrael, most notably enough also. I think there was various disputes about different appointments at various different points of time, about great rabbis, about getting, so he would actually come in and intervene, and would one stage in time elect help elect Rabbi Eliyahu Moshe Paniziel to become, I think, Rishon LeZion of Eretz Israel or of Jerusalem at one stage in time. Very interestingly enough, I think Rabbi Levi was convinced. He actually convinced Sultan Abdul Hamid II to meet with Benjamin Zev Herzl in the year 1901 in Istanbul. So he was very well connected with various different political figures all over the spectrum. And I think some people say different things about it. He left his position, I think, in the year 1908. I think at that point in time, much is said, and he would be then replaced by Rabbi Chaim Nachum Effendi over there. Don't know how connected they were towards Rabbinical Seminary. These Rabbonim were obviously, Chaim Nachum Effendi was a Chatan of, as we stated before, of Abraham Danon, but very interesting. And obviously this was, I think at that point in time, there were various other Rabbinical seminaries. It was originally an Alliance school system. I think the jstore.org website gives a whole PDF information within regards to that specific place. So I'd recommend everyone to also look at about that also. So that is, I think, very interesting. And it's good to explore the different, let's say, seminaries of all the various different countries also. And hopefully we're going to speak about and explore the seminaries of other places also all over Europe. Maybe we'll try and look into England. What was it like over there? And the ones, I think there was one also in Vienna, if I'm not mistaken. And there was other places also. I think the Citrom Center for Jewish Studies also quote Abraham Danon in various different articles. Also, he's featured very much in the, I believe, the Jewish Encyclopedia also. He is. It's actually interesting. Danon published a collection of 55 Judeo-Spanish ballads. The 55 ballads, which I think was sung in Turkey. Interesting enough, also this is what the Jewish Encyclopedia would actually write within regards to him. I think there's a whole article from other places also, if I'm not mistaken, and which is very, very interesting. So we hope to, so that's very, very interesting. So so we can speak more maybe about, we'll speak more about the history of various different countries also at various different points in time. And it was just a special edition over here, and we hopefully will learn more in the coming time periods. I'd like to know a list of who were the actual rabbis that actually did succeed and get smicha from this seminary and went to various different places. Now, one rabbi, I believe, that did actually graduate and would take on various different positions, I think in Macedonia, if I'm not mistaken, was another interesting rabbi. His name was Rabbi Sabetia the J.N. He was actually born in the year 1883 and 1947. I think he was a Bulgarian-born Sephardic rabbi. He was active in Macedonia, Romania, Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile. And he was a Talmid of Rabbi Abraham Danon. Also, he was studying in the seminary of Alliance Israelite Universal in Istanbul. So he was actually a student, I believe, in the Rabbinical Seminary over there. He also would study philosophy, I believe. I think he actually got this position through a suggestion through Rabbi Alkali, and he will settle in Macedonia, and he served between the years 1925 to 1928 as chief of the community. And it's said that he was one of the founders of the World Confederation of the Sephardi Jews, established at Vienna Conference in 1925. He had support of government in Belgrade, toured various different Sephardic communities in the Americas, and he was. I think he also helped raise money for children that were orphaned in the Balkan Wars. And once again, I think he did support Reform Judaism to some level. This might maybe stick more with regards to the Reformations. This seminary tried to take place at that point in time. Apparently he advocated to remove a mechitza from the Kahal Aragon, and he also established a first Jewish kindergarten over here. Once again, Orthodox Judaism would unequivocally not want a removal of a mechitza, so I'd state that from the outset. I think he left at that point in time and would then go on to serve as chief rabbi in various places in I think in South America, I think including Uruguay and Argentina, if I'm not mistaken. He'd eventually become a chief rabbi in Romania also. which is interesting enough. So I don't know how big the Jewish communities was over there. And he would work, I think, in Buenos Aires also. And he was very into Ladino heritage. I think write songs in Ladino inside that specific language in himself. But once again, him being a graduate, and then let's say he tried to take on a more reform approach in some of these communities, it maybe says about that the more liberal nature this seminary, the rabbinical seminary, actually had at that stage in time for all those years. So there's there's more interesting articles actually on the internet. There's another one I can see over here that was written from the Jewish Studies from Washington University website over here. I haven't got time now to state it over, but maybe at another stage. So friends, please everyone subscribe to the channel. We are nearing on this channel 7,000 subscribers. We have explored various different rabbinical seminaries already inside this series, and hopefully we're going to explore the other ones also as the time comes on, and hopefully we'll learn more together. So on this note, wishing you all well, take care, and I hope you enjoyed this special edition over here. Thank you very much from the city of